All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I always want to say good evening when we start because that's what I say when I start all of our other virtual programs, but it's the afternoon still. Thank you for joining us for the May edition of What Are You Reading, where we talk about different books our librarians here have read and what they recommend and what they've thought of them. If you are watching here live from home, we encourage you to leave a comment, whether you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube or on our website. There's a spot to leave comments. Let us know what you're reading. Let us know if you read any of these books. Let us know what you think of them. We'd love to hear what you think. With that all that being said, how all three of you doing today?
Great.
Doing great.
Sunny out. We've got library doors open.
It's real nice out there. So now is a good time to find a good book, and then you can sit outside and read and enjoy the nice weather while it lasts. All right, well we'll get started here. Let's see, do this if I can. There we go. All right, Chris, we will start with you. And
Awesome.
what do you want to talk about first?
I'm going to talk about modern love first. So, modern love, it's modern love, true stories of love, loss, and redemption. This is a compilation of essays from the New York Times Modern Love column. This edition that I read was revised and updated in 2019. Some of the writers included are known authors like Jean Hant Korelitz, who I talked about last month, Amy Krauss Rosenthal, and Anne Hood, dozens of others. So the book is broken down into 4 sections, each with different headings. I particularly liked the Family Matters section, and I think I read every single one of those essays in that section. What's nice about this compilation is you have the ability to kind of pick and choose, read the essays that are of interest to you based on either the title or the author or the section that it's in. I really enjoyed being able to randomly kind of pick and choose what I wanted to read based on either the length or, like I said, the subject. Each entry tells you a little bit about the author of the essay. It gives you a suggestion of a book title, which I thought was really nice. So if you liked that essay, you could look up another book by that author. And it also mentions when the essay originally appeared, what year. What I really liked about each essay was that it told of a different human condition, whether it was grief, maybe it was a forgotten memory, maybe it was the thrill of the unknown, maybe it was about dating after your spouse has passed and your children are like, who's in bed with you, daddy? So there was humor in it. Each one presented a story about how people experience life in different ways. And that really spoke to me at this point because I think it's super important for us to be able to hear and read and see stories about different experiences for people. And ultimately, in this particular book, the ways that humans are bound to each other is through love. And I just really thought that was a wonderful, wonderful book to spend some time with.
I like you had mentioned how it gives like a little description of the author and then a book recommendation of what they've written. So I wanted to ask you, are there any authors that you found from reading this book that you might want to check out more?
No, I didn't, but I did kind of, I wish I had it in front of me because I could flip it open. There were two of the male authors that I was like, oh, I want to find out what they, because they're the ones that I read were they were humorous. And I was like, I'd like to read more about what they wrote.
Well, cool. Thanks for sharing that. That sounds really neat. I am pretty interested in this. Thank you, Chris. All right, Sherry, what do you want to talk about first?
My first one is Pandora by Susan Stokes Chapman. So the story starts with Pandora Blake. She's an orphan living with her uncle in Georgian London. So it's kind of historic fiction. Her parents were archaeologists who also owned an antiquities shop. But her uncle, he mostly sells forgeries and he treats her with disdain. Dora longs to make a living with her jewelry designs and become independent, but she's thwarted at every turn. And then she discovers that Hezekiah, which is her uncle, has received a mysterious artifact that he's hiding from her. He keeps it locked in the basement, and he spends all night down there. She hears him crying and talking to it. So she's intrigued, can't figure out why he would hide something from her. So she teams up with Edward Lawrence, who is a young man who desperately wants to be accepted to an antiquities society. He happens to wander into the shop one day, and there's a mysterious bearded man who kind of guides him that way. So together they decide to work to find out what's so special about this mysterious vase. So this book was a bestseller in the UK, but it hasn't had the same success here, and I can't really figure out why. It's really fascinating historical fiction, and it's got a small link to mythology, hence the title Pandora. That's really intriguing. So I think if you're wanting to dip into the mythology-based books that are super popular, this would be perfect to kind of dip your toe in, because there's just enough mythology to make it interesting, but it's really historical fiction about Pandora and her uncle.
Is there anything that you could compare this book to? It sounds kind of it sounds kind of like fun and lighthearted. Would you say it's like kind of lighthearted or more?
I would say maybe The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, or even like Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness.
I feel like Discovery of Witches is like a really popular one here for us. For What Are You Reading? We've talked about that a lot.
Yes.
We've gotten some feedback on that one too. So I think that's a really great comparison. All right, cool. Sherry, thank you very much. Nancy, what do you want to talk about first?
Before that, I just wanted to say, Sherry, we have so many books in common. I'll definitely read Pandora. I keep a pen and pencil and write books down that we discuss here. If you check your Goodreads, you can click on a button to see what books you have in common with a friend. And we have tons in common.
I'm sure we do.
Yeah, all the witchy ones and the spooky ones. What I want to talk about first, this is super exciting. They finally wrote the third and final book of the Jaipur trilogy. It started out with The Henna Artist. There's a book in between. And then this book is The Perfumist of Paris. So when you first start reading The Henna Artist, there is a whole list of characters that you have to learn because they keep referring to them by name. And it seems like just a whole lot, too many to keep track of. There's, they go all the way from the slums of India up to the palace, and they talk about everybody in between, and their stories are all important. And the way she rolls all these characters together and you get to know each one, I didn't even have to use that list by the third book. And what's exciting about this series is now you have all three of them and you can plow right through all three of them because there were a few years in between each book that we had to wait. So yes, definitely binge this series. It's excellent, excellent, excellent. Actually, I could say this. It starts out with the henna artist. There's a woman who's rather displaced in society, and she makes her way to the palace by being an extraordinary henna artist. She has a sister that she raises, and it's kind of a side story. And the sister has a baby. Well, it ends up the baby is grown. The sister has never met him. She gave the baby up a long time ago, but the sister is the perfumist of Paris. So you hear all of these people's stories. They all come together. They're very well written. And by the time you finish the series, the story is truly finished. I just can't say enough good about it.
Did you read them all together, or did you read them waiting for the next?
I read each one when it came out, so it was kind of torturous.
It's always interesting how that can maybe even change how you look at a book sometimes, not having to wait that long or having time to kind of, dwell on it. You'd recommend trying just to read them all together, though? You think?
Oh, yes, definitely. Yep.
Then you don't have to wait.
Yeah, because they're all available now, so go right through the whole story. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. All right, Chris, we're back to you. What is next?
First, I want to say I kind of wish I would have done that with the Thursday Murder Club, because I read the first two right back to back and I loved them. And by the time the third one came out, I think a year later or whatever it was, I didn't love that one as much. And it's like, I wonder if I'd waited and read the three of them together, would I have, loved all three of them? Who knows? But my next book is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone. Apparently, I'm on a nonfiction kick this year. I looked back on my titles this year, and I've read a lot of nonfiction. So here's some more nonfiction. This is by Lori Gottlieb, and it was published in 2019, so pre-COVID. I'm curious what she would say in her book post-COVID, but maybe she's writing one. I don't know. Anyway, she's a psychotherapist and a national advice columnist. We hear a lot about her journey to becoming a psychotherapist in the very first chapters of the book. And it was a long journey for her. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted to be a doctor. She wanted to be a writer. Then she ended up being a therapist. So anyway, once she gets through all that, she takes us behind the scenes of the lives of some of her patients at her practice in Los Angeles. And I think this was the better part of the book. So in alternating chapters at that point, she also takes us on her therapy journey, where we meet her therapist, who she calls Wendell. So in the alternating chapters, we hear about some of her patients, and then we hear about her and her visit with her therapist. So like I mentioned, it's a little slow to get started, but as the patients begin to reappear chapter after chapter, you really get invested in their story and how they're doing. You're really interested in, what's going to happen to them. So that really grew on me over time, and I enjoyed hearing about the different patients. In general, I felt like it was an interesting read about therapy, because not only are we reading about her role as a therapist as she's helping people, but we're also reading about her as the person being helped by another therapist. So I think in general, this book is really helpful for people to read as a way to be exposed to what therapy is like. And I think it also helps to destigmatize therapy and the different reasons for why people go to therapy. So I would really recommend this to anyone, either who is considering therapy or knows someone in therapy but has never been themselves, because it will really give you kind of a good insight to what it can be like.
I think you made a really good point. It'd be so interesting to hear like what this book would be like after COVID, right? That feels like there must be so many different things now, or so many things to talk about during that time. I wonder if she is writing something else now.
Yeah, I hope she is, because she's also, her life journey to becoming a therapist was that she's also a writer. So hopefully she's doing that, even though I know, and according to this book, that writing is sometimes a struggle for her. So.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. Thank you, Chris. All right, Sherry, what's up next?
The Last Housewife by Ashley Winstead. I classify it as psychological suspense, I think. So Shay's living the high life in Texas. She's married to a wealthy man, and she's left her job in journalism to achieve her lifelong dream of writing a novel. She has a bit of writer's block, though, so she's pretty much just lounging around the house when she comes across a true crime podcast who happens to be hosted by a childhood friend that she hasn't seen in years. So Jamie, it turns out, is looking into the supposed suicide of Shay's college roommate, Laurel. Shay hasn't seen Laurel since college. They'd lost another roommate, Clem, to suicide, and Shay needed some distance. So she heads to New York on a whim to help Jamie. She's certain that her roommate wouldn't have committed suicide, so she decides she's going to help Jamie prove that it wasn't. And we get flashbacks of a really horrific time during college when Shay, Laurel, and Clem get involved with this charismatic older man, and it's kind of a cult-like situation, kind of like NXIVM, I would describe. And she's trying to figure out if Laurel could have been drawn back to the cult, because she's learning all kinds of like strange things that Laurel had done. Like she wasn't working in the field that she had graduated with. She was doing catering, and she had never been interested in cooking or catering at all. So Shay and Jamie get drawn into a situation that they couldn't have predicted. And Shay kind of needs to fight the urge to be drawn into that world again. That being said, I almost didn't finish this one. About 1/4 in, I almost put it down because it was so disturbing and I was worried about where it might be going. It was worth continuing though, and I really do recommend it. Just know that it's disturbing going in because it involves, like I said, a cult-like situation, a lot of really disturbing things that happen to them. But the end is definitely worth it.
That's, I think, a really great review, because I feel like sometimes there are books that I get kind of far into and I'm not really feeling it. And I'm like, I don't know if I should continue or not. But if someone would tell me, hey, it is worth it, then I would want to keep going. Do you
listen? Put it down.
Yeah. Do you listen to any podcasts, Sherry?
Every once in a while, but not as a rule.
It's just interesting because, you know, I feel like there are two big types of podcasts. They're like true crime podcasts. There's also like a lot of like cult podcasts. So I feel like the author of this book is kind of like tapped into that, maybe, you know, using
the other interesting thing about her is she writes really dark psychological suspense, but she also writes romantic comedy, and not really sure how she manages to do both.
That's pretty funny. That's interesting. All right. Thank you, Sherry. Nancy, what would you like to talk about next?
I wanted to tell Chris I did read that book about the therapist. My undergrad is psychology, so I'm attracted to those types of books, and it was really good. Yeah, I liked it a lot. One thing I'm amazed by when I read books by like professional people like therapists or doctors, they admit freely that they don't know everything. And they're kind of fumbling around to get the answers for us when we go to them, which is kind of, I don't know, it's a little disturbing because you just think of them, they know, they'll fix it. But like you get a peek behind the curtain. So interesting. My next book is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I've been listening to a lot of booktubes. The TikTok ones go by too fast for me. I'm usually tired when I'm looking at them and I'm laying sideways and they stack a bunch of titles on top and they go really fast. So I like BookTube. They take them one at a time and they talk in depth about each book. And this book kept coming up. A lot of women I've been watching that are younger than me to get kind of in tune with different genres to buy for my library. And this book starts off with Sam and Sadie. They meet in the hospital and they're both children. And come to find out as the story develops, Sam is brilliant in mathematics and Sadie is brilliant in game making. So this is like a longitudinal story. You start with them as children and you go all the way through until they're middle-aged adults. It closely follows both of them, and they actually create a gaming business together. And you see all the ups and downs of a business, which I was kind of curious about the gaming side of it because I'm not a gamer and I know nothing about that. So I learned a little bit, and it's fascinating the way those people who create games, the way their minds work. Totally opposite of the way mine works, but they imagined all of these games and all of these worlds together. And throughout time in their lives, sometimes they were closer to each other. Sometimes they had falling outs and they came back together. And one of them actually had a baby. And it's just a really nice longitudinal story. I read every word and the book could have been longer. I just loved it. It was just very well written. In fact, I think I did this one audiobook. So it was just a really nice story. Nothing too horrible. Just very good character development. So I would highly recommend this one.
I feel like I keep seeing this book show up to me, like
Yes.
the different places or see it recommended.
Yes,
And
it's
so
popping up
maybe that's a
everywhere.
sign that I need to read it now.
It's a very sweet story. I really liked it.
All right, thank you, Nancy. All right, Chris, what is your last book of the afternoon?
So the backstory on my last book is that in March I read the Book Haters Book Club, and I didn't talk about it on here because I wasn't sure that I really liked it. But throughout the Book Haters Book Club, one of the main characters recommends books throughout, and one of the books that he recommended was Tuck Everlasting by Natalie Babbitt. And that book's been around a long time. It's a kid's book, and I put it on and it had been actually on my to be read list forever and ever and ever and ever. So I said, you know what? It's time to read it. So this is a junior fiction title published in 1975. I thought maybe it was an award winner, but I don't believe it is. So I looked it up and didn't see any awards for it. In any case, it follows the story of 11-year-old Winnie. It's a fantasy novel about drinking from a magical spring and never aging. So Winnie decides to run away from home to escape her overbearing family. In the woods, she meets a young man, and he's drinking from the spring. When she asks him how old he is, he says he's 104 years old. But he quickly changes his mind and says, no, I'm sorry, I'm 17. Well, this makes Winnie super like, what? And he then explains to her that, well, she shouldn't drink from the spring because it provides, everlasting life. And then the young man's family shows up, and they decide that they essentially have to kidnap Winnie because she knows the truth about them, and they can't have anybody knowing the truth about them in the spring because it would just cause all kinds of trouble. So they essentially kidnap her back to their homestead, where the mother and father have lived for, I don't know how many years, 75 years, I think. And the two sons travel around the country because they don't want to draw attention to the fact that they never age and therefore never get older and can't die. So they've been keeping this secret about the spring for over 80 years. In the meantime, as this is all going on, an out-of-towner has been spying on them, and he tries to steal the land that the spring is on so that he can make a profit off of this everlasting life spring. But so then what follows after that is a bit of an adventure, and Winnie has to come to terms with her new friend's reality and how it's going to relate to her life. It's a short little book at about 148 pages, so that's why I'm not telling you how it ends. So it's a quick afternoon read, and that you can check off your to-be-read list if it's on there.
You said it's been on your list for a while. What made you originally want to read it before reading the what was the?
You know what? I think it was a movie. So I think when it came out in the movie, I probably put it on the list. I'm talking 10 years, Brian. It's probably been on my list for 10 years.
Wow.
Do you think, waiting for it for so long, did it maybe change how you viewed it or read it? Like we talked about, the delay between your other mystery book club, whatever that book.
I
think it would have been okay.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I don't think it changed the way. I think it was just, what? 12 years ago, I was a youth librarian. So it was on my radar back then. And, I should read this because kids, and then I just kind of forgot about it.
Sure.
Until it showed up in the Book Haters Book Club.
There you go. All right. Thank you, Chris. Sherry, what do you want to talk about for your last book today?
My last one is Maud's Line by Margaret Verbal. And this one's been on my TBR list for quite a long time. Probably not as long as Tuck Everlasting was on Chris's, but at least 5, 6, 7 years. And I finally decided to move it to the top. So Maud nails a young Cherokee woman I think she's about 18, living in Indian Territory on her father's allotment after Oklahoma has become a state. Her mother died when she was young, and her father isn't very reliable. He disappears for long stretches of time, and when he is around, he's either gambling or drinking. So she and her brother, whose name is Lovely, do most of the chores around the allotment, and they rely on several family members who live nearby to help them. And the brother is, he's mentally ill. He hears voices. He thinks things are happening around him. So as that's happening, because it's slowly developing as the story goes on, Maud's ending up taking more and more responsibility for the land, chores, and her brother. And then the brother disappears for like long periods of time as well. So she's worried about him. And she is quite an avid reader, and she dreams of leaving all this tough life behind and maybe attending college someday. There's a fairly wealthy man who lives nearby, and she goes to his house and he allows her to borrow books for like months at a time. So then Booker Wakefield shows up, and he's a widowed peddler and shows an interest in Maud. So she begins to think that he might be her ticket to leave this life behind. But then something happens. Some rivals of the family end up dead, and Booker leaves in a huff. So Maud has to kind of pick up the pieces while trying to figure out if he's coming back for her or not. This one is just, her prose is beautiful. She's got really rich descriptions of the day-to-day life and of Oklahoma during that time. The author is an enrolled member of the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, and she set the novel on her family's allotment land. So clearly she knows what she's talking about. This is her debut. She has 2 or 3 more books, I think. And then it was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in 2015 or 16. And I can certainly see why. This was probably like my best read of the month so far.
That's pretty good. So it's good that you finally got around to reading it. What made you originally add it to read list?
I think because she was Cherokee, and I try and read as much Indigenous literature as I can. So I think I added it then and just never got around to it. I think maybe the Pulitzer Prize nomination kind of intimidated me a bit.
Sure. All right. Thank you, Sherry. And Nancy, you get to close us out today. What is the last book we're going to talk about?
All righty, I have a really good one. It's Dark Academia, and it's called The Cloisters by Katie Hayes. This one was popping up a lot. Also, it's a standalone. It reminds me of, I talked about another series. There are 2 books in to The Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is Dark Academia. That reminds me a lot of that one. Anne Stillwell arrives in New York City. Her father, I think he was a janitor on campus, and he had a love of languages and taught her, I think she's got like 8 different languages under her belt. She wants to spend her summer interning at the Met. However, when she goes there, something happens with that job, and they need to fill another job in the Cloisters. It's a Gothic museum that mainly specializes in tarot card collections. So she's drawn into this very small circle. There's another woman who's interning, and the museum's curator is a professor, and it's a very weird little circle, and weird things are happening. She has kind of a supernatural ability with the tarot cards, but she keeps that to herself because she senses that they might want something from her that she doesn't want to give if she reveals that to this group. It turns really weird. It's creepy. I don't think we used to call anything Dark Academia. We'd just say it's a creepy book. It's really good. There's a murder on campus. She has a strange affair with someone. There's a garden of poisonous plants at this on this campus. So it's just a very, very good, intriguing story. I don't want to give away any more than that, but it's a good book. I read it all the way through.
It reminds me a little bit of a book you talked about maybe last month or the month before, The Book Eaters. Is
Oh,
it
yeah.
kind of similar? I don't know. It gave me like the same kind of feeling, I guess. I don't know. Listening to you talk about it
It
a little bit,
reminds,
maybe.
well, I've been reading a lot of dark academia lately. It reminds me more of the Ninth House series. Um, things are supernatural, things are happening that you don't quite understand. It takes you through the whole book to wrap up everything.
Sure.
And then when you get done, you think, wow, what a story. Why would somebody think of that to be a story? And I'm kind of uncomfortable with tarot cards. So I thought, oh, this will be something different. So yeah, it was good. Kind of a supernatural tale.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you for that, Nancy. That's all our books we have today. Any other comments from anyone before we go? Anyone else wants to say anything to our viewers at home? If not, I know we'll be back here again next month with more books. And I think I'm going to try and make some Facebook posts too to get people to kind of give us some of what they're reading before our next live show, so we can kind of maybe prepare that and have some things to talk about there too. All right. If that's everything, though, I think we can head out. Thank you, Nancy and Sherry and Chris, for being here with us. And thank you for everybody for watching at home. Looks like we had a few more live viewers this month than normal. So that's really cool. Thank you for watching. All right. We'll be back in June, and take care, everyone. Goodbye.